Welcome, everybody. I'm Greg Gallant, the co-founder and CEO of the Shorty Awards and also Muckrack. It's great to have you all join us here virtually, of course, and we're really excited to get this whole series going. Just a bit of backstory. I started the Shorty Awards in 2008. We were the first award show to honor social media and now all of digital. One big trend we saw early on was that our social good categories were our most popular, and that led us to spin out a new show, the Shorty Social Good Awards, that we launched about 5 years ago and has surged in popularity and interest. One thing we've seen across both shows, the Shorty Awards and the Shorty Social Good Awards, I think it's an indicator of what's happening now in our society, is that people are really looking towards brands and also the creator community for leadership on issues like inclusion and many other social issues. And they're kind of filling this important voice. They, of course, have a huge voice on social media, and that kind of works its way into all parts of culture. So I think now more than ever, what happens on social media, the examples set by brands, the examples set by creators, really matter. And that's why we're excited to start this webinar series, and especially excited for today's panel on inclusion in the digital world. Couple quick notes before I hop off and let the panel take it away. If you're interested in the Shorty Social Good Awards, if you're working with a brand or agency or organization doing amazing work, they're actually open for entries now. The deadline is coming up August 28th, so start working on your entry now, or when you get a follow-up email to this, you can get in touch with the producer on our team, and they'd be happy to walk you through the process. And pretty much I've got a really easy job here today, which is all I have to do is introduce Shayna Walker, our amazing panel moderator. We'll take it away from here. Shayna is the Director of Diversity and Inclusion and Campus Recruiting at Horizon Media, which has won many, many, many Shorty Awards over the years and is a great organization. She leads the agency's diversity, equity and inclusion strategy, and oversees campus and entry-level recruiting for Horizon's New York office. And this is really exciting. Recently, Shayna was named one of Ad Age's Women to Watch in 2020, which I know is a coveted list, and also one of Synopsys Media's top 9 women to watch in media. So we're so happy you could join us today, Shayna. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Greg. Really excited to be here and be in such great company with the other panelists, which I will now let them introduce themselves before we jump into a meaty conversation, and one that I know we're all looking forward to sharing a lot of insights on. So Jimmie, would you like to go first with introducing yourself?
Well, yes, thank you very much. It's a pleasure, Greg. Thank you for the Shorties for this opportunity to talk to anybody interested in this super important topic. My name is Jimmie Stone. I'm the Chief Creative Officer for Edelman in New York in Latin America. I am originally from Venezuela, Caracas, live in Uruguay where my wife is Uruguayan, and moved to the United States and to New York more than 20 years ago. So I'm a New Yorker with 2 kids, total New Yorkers, Brooklyn kids. So just very, very much a pleasure to be here. One of the interests about this is that coming from as an immigrant coming to the United States over the part of this 20 years has been very incredibly interesting to see this ideal of a melting pot that we all came to here to see, and it's starting to understand and to get all this complexity of this conversation that we want to have today, and how do we deal with advancing the beauty of the ideal that brought me into this country, which is the diversity of all of us makes much, much better work and much, much better creative work. So I would love, very interesting to have this conversation with you all, and thank you for inviting me.
That's awesome. Thank you. Judy?
Yes, hi. I'm Judy Lee. I'm the Global Head of Experiential Marketing at Pinterest. And I'm also a Brooklynite. I think I can call myself that after being here for about 5 years. And I'm really excited to be here and have this discussion because I think now more than ever, it's very timely. And I think it's hard not to have these conversations. So excited to be here.
Awesome. I'm going to ride the Brooklyn wave. I'm also from Brooklyn, so definitely even more in great company. Chantal?
Hi, I'm an artist. I've lived in Brooklyn. I don't live there now, but I live in Jersey City, originally from London, and then I ended up living in Japan for many years. But essentially, I'm an artist and educator and someone that is on this absurd career of being an artist. Don't ask me why I chose to be an artist. It's a challenging but very rewarding career path. And so I've just been enjoying life with all the roller coaster of things that come my way.
Great, thank you. And of course, not last, yes, but not least, Sonal.
Yeah, hi everybody. A big hi from Mumbai, India, at 1 o'clock at night. So I've always been in advertising, have been an advertising creative person all my life. Till very recently, I was the Chief Creative Officer for Southeast Asia for Ogilvy, where I spent most of my life working in India, Malaysia, Singapore. And now I'm back in Bombay, but I've now gone independent because I've always seen myself as a storyteller of all formats and all avenues. So I'm now getting into long form storytelling, which means that I'm working on a feature film right now, feature film writing and directing. So that's the project I'm working on right now. Besides that, I love chatting. I love newer experiences. So I like cooking. I like playing blackjack. I love single malls. So these are some of my passions. And to begin with and to end it all, I love storytelling, and that's what I love doing.
Great. We're definitely going to hear a lot of stories today. Before we go into our questions, I want to let the audience know to please see the Q&A section, and that's where you can share any questions that you'd like the panelists to answer in addition to what we're going to discuss. So just wanted to put that out there. So thanks so much for your introductions. I want to go a little bit deeper and really hear your personal journeys, especially as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. What are some things that you've had to overcome as well?
Yeah, so I think, as someone who was born in South Korea, and I also immigrated here, but at a very young age, it's, for me, I always say it's been impossible not to see the world through a lens of race and gender, especially being one that's, generally not in the position of power. And so I think, that's always been like in my mind and how I view the world, and can really like tempered my approach to, how I view things. And I think, this year more than ever has been a year of massive reckoning. And while it's always been there in my mind and something I think about, I think it just got pushed to the forefront for many of us. And I think it was kind of that reckoning of, how Professor Ibram X. Kendi had said, like, if you're not fighting against racism, you're supporting it. And that is something I believe, but I've never heard verbalized that way. And I think for me, like, especially this year, it was time to recognize my own biases that I may have, and recognize that everyone has bias. And I think, to not say that is to really like denigrate like a lot of other people's experiences. And when I really reflect on my own experiences, that I've often been in places where I look different than everyone else, both from like a personal and a professional setting. And I've grown up in different communities where no one else really looked like me. And so I always kind of had this feeling of the other, and I've done a lot of like studying on Orientalism and kind of like that overall thinking and that thinking of the other. And for me, like especially being in marketing and kind of the creative industry, I think about it a lot in terms of how people are represented in culture, how they're shown or not shown. And I think with that being always top of mind, I feel like more than ever, I feel like it's time to act. And whether, like, I don't think I've been particularly complacent. I've been pretty vocal and work on being an advocate. And for me, something I'm personally passionate about is mentorship, because, you know, my parents came here, they worked in sweatshops when I first arrived, and I didn't come here with like a professional network. No one taught me how to do things. And so for me, when I think about equity and inclusion, I always think about how can I level the playing field for others, where I really wish I had these things when I was coming up in the world. But instead it was more about, you know, like having to combat a lot of personal racism or hatred. And I often think about, like, how can I help people live the American dream rather than the nightmare that it's become for some people. So for me, that's something that I feel really personally passionate about. And even something that Jimmie, you touched on, because I have a very conflicted view on the melting pot. And I think for the majority of my life, I'm like, yeah, melting pot, cool. That means I can assimilate and I can be part of this culture and kind of where I am. But, you know, what I really thought, and I got this idea from a friend in Canada, because the approach there is quite different. And they really talk about it as a mosaic, where everyone retains their identity. And it's not about erasing who you are or where you're from. And I think I spent so much of my life doing that, trying to assimilate in this kind of white culture of America, that, but now, like, I've come around and I'm like, no, I'm proud. I'm proud to eat stinky kimchi. I'm proud to, like, do these things. When, you know, when I was in school, I'd be like, oh, I have Korean food for lunch. Like, everyone's staring at me. And now I'm proud. I'm like, yes, I smell like this, and this is great. So I think for me, it's come full circle, and I'm lucky to be in a place where I feel confident and comfortable to do that, and work in a place that supports that.
Jimmie, you look like you want to add to that.
No, I'm just I'm looking at this mosaic here, and I'm like, okay, who's next? So no, I just I love that image that we're talking about. Melting pots feels to me that you're seeing it almost like everybody goes into this soup and becomes one. I see it more as different ingredients going into a soup that tastes delicious. But I see what you're saying about the mosaic. One thing that I want to just add in that, when I arrived to the United States, I always believed that diversity makes the work better. There's no question about it. Now we have, even Google has data that supports that a diverse team makes the work richer, makes the work more effective, more resonant, and in a polycultural world that we are living in, will definitely be more effective work. So there is no question in anyone's mind, unless you have a fixed mindset, which we could talk about that diversity is not only a moral thing to do, is a beautiful thing to do. But what I have noticed is that even into myself, I naturally start to become complacent or blind of the systemic nature of the biases and the structural situation that is happening with allowing diversity to happen. Not only to allowing diversity to happen, but the equity that you're talking about, the inclusion. So I just wanted to add that in the beginning, I did not see it. I did not believe it, or not believe it that it existed. And over time, I'm starting to realize that not only exists, that I am part of it, and that I have something to do about it. So it's just turning the light inward and understanding how I am part of a system, and what can I do to start to change it, has been transformational for me. And I feel that even though I always believed, and I started into this process years ago, I always feel that I am just in the beginning of the process, and I wish that I can press fast forward a little bit more. So these conversations are very important for that.
You know, it's I'll jump in. Lots of nice visuals, melting pots, mosaics. You know, and as you're saying, Jimmie, you know, companies know that there's benefits to having melting pots or mosaics and people from different races and culture, but knowing it and living it are different things. And also, if your neighborhoods and your schools and your communities and your C-suites and your companies, if they're not all mosaics or on your level melting pots, then, you know, how can we expect kind of holistically everything to work like that? So it has to start from, you know, very basic level to mixing schools to communities, you know, to housing, with levels of race and religion and culture and income. I come from, you know, we're talking about kind of our own personal background. You know, I'm English essentially, but actually I'm British because I'm not white. And so, you know, it's very subtle, but if you're English, it's kind of reserved for being white. And if you're British, that's what we kind of give to people of color in England. And so I would never really call myself English, even though I have 5 siblings who have a different dad. So they're English, they're white, they're blonde, they're blue-eyed. And so I grew up in Southeast London, and in an area that was very working class, very racist, very homophobic. And I looked like me, you know, brown, Afro, queer, all of those things. And so, you know, I learned at a very young age is that how people perceive you at home and in your family is very different from how the world see you. So I would walk out of my house and now people have assumptions of where I'm from, you know, my background in England, as soon as we speak, you know, your class. And I've also seen an evolution of being someone that's mixed race. You know, when I was younger, I was half caste, and then I was mixed race, and now I'm biracial. And in America, I'm Black. And so there's also these nuances and spectrums in different cultures, in different races. And I think what's really nice about now is that we're hearing more and more and more of these stories. And it's so funny being here in America because, you know, you throw a little curveball in there where someone isn't exactly one thing and people get so confused. And, you know, we have had people from everywhere traveling everywhere for a really long time, having children, and those children have different backgrounds and cultural upbringings. But yet, if it's not super black and white, we get really confused. So I'm really happy to hear now that we're hearing the perspective and the stories of people from cross cultures, religions and races and incomes and all of those things. So there's a sense of mosaic in those stories at the moment.
In India, for example, I mean, India is a fascinating country because it's a large place. There are multiple religions, castes and subcastes, you know, that whole caste system on one hand. There are different regions which are totally different from each other. East is so different from West. North is so different from the South. Different races living at different places. So as you grow up in this very complex but fascinating, so to say, structure and dynamics, you do come face to face with this, what we call, biases of all kinds, whether it's to do with religion, whether it's to do with color, whether it's to do with language, whether it's to do with, and there is this rich and poor divide also is very, very stark compared to some of the other countries. So there are biases of all kinds that you grow up seeing around you. And as I grew up, I mean, it's great that now things are changing. There's more and more conversation about it. And things are changing in a really, really big way. Gender biases are being changed. What I, as an advertising person, has seen is that, which Jimmie, you also touched upon, which is that on one hand are these the biases, but when biases go away, this diversity actually can be a really, really huge creative force. So I see it almost like a kaleidoscope, you know. There are these little glass pieces of different colors and different sizes. And you start to turn them, and they can start to, throw so many kinds of different lights and different patterns. And that's where I think community should be heading. That's what I feel. And so this is what my experience has been with biases and the good also that can come out of it, which thankfully more and more is happening now in India.
Thank you for that. I love the third piece of the kaleidoscope. That's also an awesome visual. But even to move us towards the direction of being able to create something like that, it takes a lot of passion and commitment and dedication and grit, because it is so different from where we've been. It's really easy to get frustrated and exhausted when you're doing this type of work. So what are you all inspired by, and what are you looking forward to seeing and experiencing in the near and far future? Chantal, do you want to start us off?
Just two words jump to mind, and that's transparency and accountability. We really can't move forward if we don't have transparency in every level of our society. We really can't move forward if we don't have accountability in our society on every level, from our schools, from our communities, to our prisons, to our food regulation services, on every level, transparency, accountability, and then also just looking at money, and kind of where money goes, because money is a big factor, and I think the issue that we have in agencies, countries, governments, culture is that if you have money, you have power, and then there's a sense of protection that comes with that, and there is a sense that people don't want to give that up, and people do crazy things once they have that. They'll lie, they'll steal, they'll cheat, they'll cover things up, they'll do awful things to their clients, to their students, to their citizens. And so, I think just really looking at how people perceive this goal of becoming richer and more powerful and more protected on that level, and just really as a society, as human beings, bringing that back and trying to see where we can layer that transparency and accountability in.
Love that.
Yeah.
And,
Go ahead, Judy.
I'd love to build on that too. I think some of the things, and I think that what Chantal mentioned is very true. And I think for me, a couple of things that I feel inspired by with what, the dumpster fire of 2020 all in, not just, the good and the bad, but the silver lining that I do see is that, number one, we're having conversations that we never had before. In the past, you didn't talk about race in polite company. You didn't talk about money and divide and bias in polite company. Those were things you whispered about and had private conversations. And now it's happening in a very public forum. And I think that's the beginning, right? But talk is not enough. And I think I'm also inspired by action. And the action is that Black Lives Matter protests, I think I read a headline that it was the largest worldwide protest ever. And it galvanized communities in a way that is unprecedented. I hate saying unprecedented right now, just as a marketing person. It kind of makes me cringy just because of, a lot of the work around that. But I think, what happened there is that it's not only the talk, but we're starting to see some action. And I think, for me, seeing those protests were incredibly inspiring and fueling. And some of them were quite terrifying, to be honest, in terms of what was happening. But I think the upside is that people were getting out there, and that it was a very diverse community of people coming together, that it wasn't seen with what had started with Black Lives Matter. It wasn't a Black issue. It's an all of us issue, right? It's that none of us will have justice and equality until we at least reckon that for our Black, brothers and sisters out there. So I think for me, I've been really inspired by that, because I feel like there's been more action. Being in my mid 40s, I've seen a lot of protests in my life, and this is different. And I feel like it's the start of something, a movement that's going to last beyond the press cycle, that's going to be here, and that we can't go back. We can't go back to the way it was, right? There's no going back.
Yeah, the normal is what brought us to this moment. So I wanted to jump into that. It's like, and I know that we're getting from big issues to start getting more practical as we talk, but I am very excited about many of my friends, family sometimes accuse me to be a radical optimist. That's how I am. And I see sometimes that this pandemic is creating a human consciousness. It's happening to all of us, no matter where in any caste or any place, even though that it is disproportionately affecting our Black and brown communities in everywhere and poor communities around the world for reasons that is bringing to life the systemic nature of this, the whole interconnected world that we live in. That's why we are starting to having this conversation. It's almost like it's emerging, this conversation is emerging because we all feel interconnected. But what I am nervous about is that people who are develop a sense of empathy with a growth mindset are able to absorb this conversation. The people who are with a fixed mindset and with lack of empathy gets close, and they do not understand the interconnectivity of the whole opportunity for us to discuss this. Last point I want to say, Chantel, I agree 100% with you. What we must have is like a GPS. If we want to advance this systemic complex issue, we have to first chunk it and see where can you affect something. First with yourself, like inward, trying to eliminate your own biases or at least advancing your own biases. We all can do that. But when we are in an organization, what we must do is know as a GPS where we are in order to know where we want to go. So we have to measure. We have to measure the reality of where we are. We have to show that reality in numbers, and we have to commit to a goal and stick to that goal and push the entire force of the organization to arrive to that goal. Because ultimately that goal is a rich, diverse soil that in my industry will inevitably produce kaleidoscope beautiful things. So I would like to say that as part of why it makes me excited, I think that that conversation is actually making change. This time feels different. This time I vow to commit that I will not rest until I can do what I can control and do. And that makes me very optimistic.
We talked a lot about, you know, this being the moment it feels different. People that haven't been a part of the conversation and the movement are finally on board and helping to push the needle. But how do we give people the opportunity to make mistakes and keep trying, knowing that they may get it wrong, but allowing them to grow and really build that muscle that has been underdeveloped because it hasn't been used?
Yeah, I just want to extend on also what Jimmie, you were saying about, you know, how people close off and then how also that we need to go in. And I think, you know, mistakes, it all comes down to acknowledgement, and acknowledgement comes down to being present and being aware of yourself and having an understanding of yourself. I think a lot of the issue is that we're numb to society in a world because we have this consumeristic society where we're consuming things where I think if we need to recalibrate. And what I mean by that is if we are healthy people, we eat well, we drink well, we get good sunlight, we sleep well, we're consuming positive things. I think those are the things that help kind of recalibrate our gut, recalibrate our morals, recalibrate our instincts, so that when we do something that is kind of wrong or violent or, you know, unconsiderate, we kind of feel it within ourselves. And I think a big issue with now is that we don't know when we make mistakes because we have these blinders on. You know, we got to make money, we got to make money, we got to make money, we got to do this, we got to sell things, we got to sell things, we got to sell things. What are the numbers? What are the numbers? What are the numbers? And I think that numbs a lot of the dials that should be dialed up. Instead, they're dialed down because we're on this other path. And I think once we can really go inside again, we can recalibrate And then we know if we're making a mistake. But also just to say, like, when people are making bigger mistakes on a holistic level, you know, we got to keep those doors open. And if people are trying and there's good intention behind what they're doing, then let them keep trying. It's also really, it's not positive if we just close the door and say, you made a mistake, you cannot try again, you cannot move forward. We also have to be empathic and supportive from the other side and just put out a hand and say, well, why did you fail? Why did you make a mistake? You know, let's help from both sides.
And just to add to what Chantal said, one other good thing that's happening is that the current, the startup generation, so to say, and the entrepreneurial spirit that we are seeing, that's also propagating the fact that you can make mistakes. In fact, you should make mistakes so that you can learn from it and move faster on to the next project. And I think that, in any case, that the more and more that happens will actually start to cascade down to other industries and other parts of the society also, where mistakes will be, in a way, forgiven and, you know, will be embraced. So you won't penalize somebody for making a mistake.
Yeah, I have some builds on that. I think this is such an important part of the conversation, because I think, like, you know, someone once told me that adjacency creates empathy. And I think it's about, how do you put yourself in situations that feel very different from where you're comfortable? And I think, you know, I'm lucky from, like, how I grew up, that was my entire life. And being able to live through very different types of communities really helped me be very empathetic. And I think Chantal said it well, like, that empathy is really key. And I think there's a natural instinct to shut down and close, but it's like, how do we keep pushing to open ourselves and keep the dialogue open? Because I think there's a lot of fear out there. And I think, you know, especially people who are uncertain, or maybe they're in communities where they're afraid to speak up. I think I saw there was someone in what they were dubbing the most racist county in, like, Alabama or something. And it was one guy by himself, like, holding up a Black Lives Matter sign just to spark that dialogue. And he video recorded how people reacted, and it was pretty awful. But I think it's that kind of, like, you know, if he could change one person's mind, then I think that's worth it. And I think it's like being open to having those conversations, putting yourself in places where there are different voices. And I think it's so easy in this algorithm-driven world to be in an echo chamber where everyone agrees with you, to be in an echo chamber where everyone has that same opinion. But I think it's like putting yourself out there, being empathetic for, you know, people are going to mess up, and then just trying to have a conversation and kind of open that up.
True. And sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Sonal.
No, just a small point on Judy, which is adding to what Judy said, that this empathy, the current environment, you know, with the COVID-19 coming in and, you know, locking down the entire world, for the first time in the history, the entire world is worried about that one thing, you know. And in that kind of an environment, people are genuinely seeking empathy and embracing also empathy. We are actually becoming a little more caring than we were, because we are all feeling vulnerable. So in this kind of a situation, if messaging on empathy, on being empathetic, on being good listener, on being inclusive starts to go out more and more, this is the time that people, you know, even the most hardened of hearts might, in a way, embrace it a little more. You know, so.
I love, Sonal, that you have that positivity and optimism. Me too. My only cautious is that in these moments of complex ecosystems like we are, where empathy, our emotional intelligence, is the best skill that you can have or teach our kids to navigate a complex ecosystem. There's plenty of studies that supports that. But in these moments where there's an empathy, where is a reckoning, where is a lot of people trying to understand that, accepting that I have my own biases, and accepting and having conversations There is a massive growth of empathy. I 100% agree with you. But the status quo that is in some cases not empathetic hardens a little bit harder, gets stronger. It tries to stop that empathy from evolving. And that's the danger. The danger is that I believe beautifully that we all agree, that's what we are doing this conversation, that it is growing, that we are becoming a more awoke human family, but the status quo is gonna shut it up. And we have to be very, very smart in how we respond to an inevitable push from the block status quo fixed mindset that is still exists. Sorry to put a little bit of a contrary point, because I agree 100% with you.
I think, empathy will definitely get us to a certain point. And then I think when you couple that with being intentional, you can be even more impactful, right? So how can we be more intentional in our efforts to make diversity and inclusion more impactful and drive meaningful change?
I think, part of how I think about that is you have to engineer it into everything that you're doing and really have like a plan about it. And whether it's thinking about, like most recently, like our product team really came up with this feature, because I think so often, like when we think about beauty magazines and fashion, it looked one way for a very, very long time in history. And, even when I was growing up, I would get so excited when I saw an Asian model or just anyone Asian in the US, because there weren't that many. And that wasn't like, we were invisible. Like it wasn't like a beauty standard back then. And I think culture has changed so much over, the past few decades, but it still has a long way to go. And one of the things that Pinterest has worked on has been these inclusive search results for beauty. Because I think so often, like people have to say, we're trying to figure out like someone that looks like yourself. And so we have these new skin tone filters and features, because, what we were seeing was that people want to see what these things look like on yourself. They don't want to see what it looks like on someone who doesn't look like me. And so I think it's part of like being intentional about how can we engineer the work that we're doing? How can we engineer or create, engineer is very techy, but create work, and whether it's art or ads that look diverse and that we're reflecting the culture that we're talking about. And, my personal pet peeve, and this is slowly changing, is that when there's movies about Asian people, but they are cast with white people. And I'm like, what is that about? Like, you couldn't find an Asian actor? And so I think it's really about, and I think Chantal alluded to this too, it's about money and power. And so how do we change who's in charge of the money and the power and making those decisions and engineering them the way that that it is more inclusive? And we have to be really intentional about how we make those decisions.
Judy, when you do stuff like that, how do you kind of test that that's working and having an impact? And do you have, who's behind that kind of advising those types of change, like you mentioned with Pinterest and beauty?
Yeah, so, I don't have all the details, but from the product team, one of the people who leads it is a woman. And I think it is kind of testing that out and getting a lot of feedback from the people that we want to serve and being able to have those. And I think a lot of this tends to improve with the feedback that we get, that if the skin tone ranges aren't quite off or aren't quite on, that will continue to improve. And so this last kind of push that we had was an improvement, and using the technology to learn to make it better and for the results to be a bit more accurate. And, kind of part of what we do is like making sure that they're women. So if this is a product about women, there better be women working on the product, and they better be talking to women, and then also women of many different skin tones. So I think that's part of the virtuous cycle that we want to have to ensure that it's not a room of, no offense, men who are interested in these skincare products, kind of engineering all of that. So I think that's important. And I think, I often allude to what I call the Beyonce rule, and whether or not it's real or fake, but the story of when she walked out of a room with a large sportswear brand because there was literally no one in that room that looked like her. And so what she said is like, how are you going to represent me or create for me when there's no one who knows me?
And that is the way, Judy, that is the way that it's happening to the advertising world. Clients are starting to understand that if they are going to have to talk to a very polycultural, diverse audience, the creators of that work needs to represent the audience that we're creating. So we need to, and I just want to communicate it, the way to go against the status quo is not going against it head on because it's too strong. It's proposing, looking at what Tibor Kalman always say, the crack in the wall, looking for data, using data to help you. And when clients are looking for, in Edelman, we have the trust barometer, which is a study about trust and how clients and brands that are trusted brands. And more we're seeing that audiences are looking for brands to step into social, environmental issues. More than 3/4 of the audience wants, it's putting trust in the brand that stands for something beyond just selling the products. It's almost the number 1 or 2 of the considerations of why I buy a product. Now consumers are voting with purchasing that organization. So in that, combined with the fact that we are getting more multicultural and polycultural, we need to communicate and start to change from within. So in order to change from within, we need to know where we are. We need to commit, and transparency and accountability to commit to how do we going to get there. But one thing is diversity, the other thing is inclusion. So that it's very important that we start creating work that not just shows the struggle of the people of color culture, but to celebrate the beauty and create work that is mainstream, that happens to be inspired by a diverse culture. So that's how we are doing it. It's like not only recruitment, but we have to keep our people of color creative, Black and brown creatives, and diverse richness. And in order to keep that, it's all about the work. It's all about creating work that represents themselves. So that's what we are committed to do throughout our network.
And Jimmie, how do you deal with appropriation, where you are taking from these cultures or these creators, and essentially taking what's at the core of that and then selling it to a mainstream? Do you have any internal kind of barriers or boards that kind of deal with those types of things?
Well, that's a great question. It happens with everything. It happens with green wash, blue wash, pink wash, or rainbow wash. Our ability to create campaigns that are not truthful, that it's using a particular societal conversation and appropriating that, no matter if it's something about people of color or the struggle or environmental or any social issues. So we have to be very, very, very careful. The way to combat against that is having a diverse team. So when we are creating a campaign that is about a particular issue, we make sure that there is in that team somebody who understands subject matter experts and understands that path. Have we always, I have seen more and more a lot of purpose washing and greenwashing and blue washing and pink washing more and more. You see it in awards. So yes, that's an excellent question. We do have, depending on the issue, because this is a communication, Edelman is a communication agency, we understand that whatever we put out there needs to be truth, trust, and truth. So we definitely have a group of people that when we get into an issue that has that kind of nuance, we make sure that there is people who live in that environment to help us make sure that it is true. But ultimately, if you have teams that are already diverse, you will run way less the risk of crossing the line of appropriation or greenwashing.
And you know, the advertising, they say, is a mirror to whatever is happening in the society most of the time. But advertising, we all know, is a really, really potent force. And if we very consciously start to tell stories that bring about some kind of a change. For example, for years in India, there had been this stereotypical roles, you know, although women had moved, right, in terms of more and more women in the workplace, but the stereotypical role was that a woman will be shown as the wife, as the homemaker all the time in all kinds of ads. So that is changing. There's a campaign that was done by Ariel for detergent powder, which was share the load, you know, asking the husband also to share the load. We worked on a campaign, for example, why can't, let's say, a voice challenged person or a height challenged person, why can't be, there are all kinds of stories that can be told, yeah? Why have to be any kind of handicapped person, for example, be in a very, so to say, one of those charity kind of ads? They could be part of the mainstream advertising because they are part of the mainstream life. So there are biases of all kinds that happen. Gender biases, color biases, regional biases, language biases, which are so much there in advertising. And thankfully, all that is changing. And we can consciously actually start to look at each of these and continue to change it, because that's where communication and advertising can become a really potent force. And now you see commercials which are representative of a very, very diverse, so to say. You have started to see commercials in India or spots or advertising in India, which is actually featuring a whole lot of diverse set of people, rather than those stereotypical, you know. There used to be a time when we used to look for pan-Indian faces, you know, faces that can go pan-Indian now, which is absolutely bullshit, you know. In today's day and age, you know, you can't even speak like that. So
I have to just add, Share the Load was one of my favorite campaigns. Like, that was a really well done piece of work. And I think Chantell's provocation is a good one. And I think it is very representative of how people are viewing that. Because I think, like, people can sniff out inauthenticity in a second. And I think, you know, the things that Jimmie said, the things that Sonal said are very important in terms of how we think about that work, and that having you know, diverse teams is critical to landing that, because I think it is a fine line between appropriation and celebration, and I think, you know, it's much more difficult if you don't have a room that looks diverse and reflects the culture that you're trying to celebrate.
Great point.
Absolutely.
Great point.
Just wanted to remind the audience quickly to utilize the Q&A feature if you have any questions. We have about 13 minutes left, so definitely get your questions in if you have any. But to keep the conversation going while people think about their questions, the topic of representation, that's what we really have been talking about for the past couple of minutes. So in terms of representation, in order to get that, that's where the hiring piece comes in, right? So I'm going to start with you, Jimmie. What are some hiring practices that you've implemented to increase diverse representation at Edelman or throughout your career?
So I was, I remember advertising is generally not as, at least in the United States. Obviously, when we go outside, I don't have enough preview, but I imagine that even is more stronger. It's it's less diverse, especially creative. So we knew a couple of maybe 6 years ago that there is this gender gap. We were working with the 3% conference. We worked with all of them, Cindy Gallup, and we understood that we have to do something. It's just understanding, accepting, And moving forward today, and our creative team is 50-50 all the way through, from the entirety and all the way zero pay gap, and we solve it. So we can solve it, we put it. Now the issue is about working with Here All the Black People conference, you know, because this idea that there is no pipeline for Black and brown creatives is an illusion, it's an excuse. So it is actually, first of all, looking and making sure that we have enough work that can entice that diverse audience. Second thing that we're working on is our internal biases of understanding portfolios. We need to look beyond the portfolio and look in potential, because we understand that the junior level people that are coming from different places, some people do not have the ability to go into a portfolio school to create beautiful portfolios. And some others have been working on more niche advertising agencies because of the systemic issues, and the portfolio might not have enough economic budgets to do. So we have to look beyond portfolio and develop a relationship and be able to train the interviewers to understand the biases that we have with books and resumes, and look for potential. So those things sounds very simple, but they're very, very, very hard to really institutionalize. And when you do, you can transform the game. And the objective for this next years is to bring the maximum amount of diversity that we can. That doesn't mean to replace, that means to augment. That's the thing about the status quo. It's not that we're gonna replace, we're augmenting. When we do that, when we have bench, I believe that that's what we start changing. The work will start to change. The interviews will start to change, and then we will actually solve. I am optimistic and committed that if we did it with gender biases in the creative world, at least in my realm, not in the industry. I think we went from 3% to 17% women in creative leadership, something like that. But if we did it, we can do it. So those are two, for example, actions that we're doing to bring more diverse audience into our team, not a diverse creative into our team.
Anyone else want to chime in with hiring practices?
Yeah, I mean, now I'm not, now I'm independent, but both at DDP and then at Ogilvy, it was a very conscious decision that was taken that women creative leadership, you know, has to be increased because that had been a problem, especially in the creative that people, they were not in the leadership position. The percentage was really, really low. So it was a very conscious decision to kind of increase that. And that actually definitely worked. And in India right now, on many, many top positions, and this is not just advertising. In fact, more than advertising, in many other, whether it's banks or tech leadership, there are many, many positions which are now filled by women. So it has to be a conscious decision wherever it's not so, where the percentage is really skewed towards men. And I think within advertising, it's not just inclusivity, not just in terms of gender, in terms of even backgrounds of people, where they come from, you know. Consciously look, because storytellers or creativity, for example, communication creativity could come from anywhere. It could come from the smallest of village, you know, but we get biased. Living in these big cities, we get biased, you know, living with the way a person speaks, in a language that the person speaks, we start getting biased. And those biases we have to break down as we consciously hire people, especially in creative fields.
I just want to say one thing that I forgot. I'm sorry to jump in there, but it's also moving out and to your point of bringing them up the chain or the ladder, of however you want to call, allowing moving from mentorship, this concept of mentorship to championship, to sponsorship, allowing the young Black and brown and diverse audience and all the junior level to go in front of clients, present to them, giving them your position to present. If you are a senior leader, let them go, be open to let them go, be client facing, develop that sense of confidence. So move from a mentorship that I'm going to train you how to move into a champion. Make it your responsibility to see that career flourish.
And I just have one build on it. I think I think of this in two ways. One, if you're in a position of power and money, again, kind of coming back to that theme, make the responsible decision. You have that ability to help influence policy, and you get to select who are the partners that you work with. I ask now of like different partners and agencies, like what does your leadership team look like? I ask for the account teams to be diverse. And if you're in a position of power, you can do that. So I think people who have the money and the power use that wisely and responsibly. But then secondly, if you're not in that position, and if you are, someone who is more junior or just, don't have as much experience in a larger company, I'll say ask for the receipts. And so I think so often right now in business, there are a lot of transparency reports about what does diversity look like across the business. And just ask, like, what are those goals? What is the hiring policy? Are we looking at diverse slates when we look to hire and recruit people? And ask, and you start by asking the question. And I think just by starting that and like advocating, I think, so just don't think that just because you're not in a position of power, you can't do anything. I think everyone can do something, and you start by using your voice.
And one other good thing that one is seeing right now with technology and social, they have been actually a great catalyst when it comes to, in a way, making the society a little more inclusive, especially in India. Because now, for example, with technology in the remotest of parts of India, the same person living in a city or in a remote village, they are accessing the same educational courses on the internet. They can upskill themselves, and therefore they, kind of almost breaking the barriers that had been holding them for centuries. And that's where technology is coming in beautifully as a catalyst to kind of make things a little more inclusive and kind of bring up people who were hitherto not getting that chance. So.
All right, we're in the home stretch. We have one question from the audience. So I'm loving this conversation and I'm taking copious notes. One observation question from the discussion so far, much of the discussion has been about what BIPOC people can do or should do to make progress. But we have perhaps a unique opportunity at this time to push white people who are newly aware and engaged in this issue to support and do more. How can white people best engage and support as allies with good intentions without treading where it may not be helpful?
Good question. There's a lot of resources out there. Watch movies, read some books, and also kind of have conversations. And I think right now what's really interesting is I think before maybe 2020, and I don't want to generalize completely, but before 2020, a lot of white people didn't talk about race. And so the fact that white people amongst themselves are having these conversations, there's something to be said about that. And just like anything new, it can be uncomfortable. And I think what we're going through now is a marathon. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. It's something that we really need to train for. And everyone that is in this race together. And I think there's, what I would suggest is, you're going to be tired, you're going to get fatigued, things are going to ache. It might be painful, there might be fear there, but push through those things, have those conversations, understand that you're in this for the long run. There's no rush, but there's plenty of resources out there. for you to take advantage of by yourself, and just have those conversations amongst yourselves.
And I think one other thing that must be very naturally coming is that as a white, when you start to talk about these issues, whether people will think that it's all fake. I think just getting over that fear also will be very, very important. Just go ahead and talk about it. Go ahead and contribute.
Yeah, one additional build I would also make is like, I agree with what folks said, but then also listen and make space. And I think that's the most important thing, is like, make space for those colleagues to speak up. And, you know, if you don't feel comfortable in broader forums, you know, have a conversation, but also like, don't make it their job to educate you. And so I think it's like, wow, we've got the internet, do some research. There's some great books out there. Don't make it someone else's job. I do kind of support everything that people said, and I think that's the right thing, as I had talked about empathy before, but don't put the work on others, and learn. There's a lot of resources out there.
Yeah, and last, for my point is, have and train an open mind or a growth mindset. Make sure that you understand that we, all of us, understand that we're not fixed. We're not done. We are a massive work in progress. And it is okay, like Sonal, you said, to make mistakes. It's hard, especially because you make mistakes and you feel that you basically all of a sudden your brand gets destroyed by it. Open yourself to make mistakes. And I heard a lot, Judy, from my friends, my different friends from different places, that it's not, don't put the onus on me. You go ahead. There's plenty of opportunities for you to train yourself and to look at and to educate yourself. But having like the tough conversations, being open requires a constant practice of a growth mindset. So that's what I commit to do.
And the realization that we are all in it together. You know, you're all walking together. That realization.
I think, Sonal, that was like a perfect wrap up. We are all in it together, regardless of the various roles that we are playing in the journey. It's a journey and not necessarily a destination, right? Or the, you know, sprint. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So I want to thank all of you, Jimmie, Judy, Chantal, and Sonal. I myself learned a lot from hearing your stories, and I also appreciated that there were a lot of tactical aspects, because a lot of times we hear about concepts, we don't really hear about the how, which I know a lot of people are looking to learn. So thank you so much. Greg, Ann, and team from the Shorty Awards, thanks for having us. And just one last reminder, the Social Good Awards regular entry deadline is on August 26th. So be sure to give yourself enough time to submit for that. And I hope that everyone has a great evening, and Sonal, have a great morning.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Lovely seeing you all. Thank you.
Thank
Bye, everybody.
you.
Bye.